such a wonderful pleasure to see you all here. My name is Leonard Wantchekon. I'm a professor of political economy here at Princeton University. I'm also the founder of the African School of Economics. I'm going to be introducing shortly Patrick Achi, the former Prime Minister of Côte d'Ivoire, who is going to talk about industrial policy, past and future prospect, with focus on the African continent. Mr. Patrick Achi is a key advisor to the president of Côte d'Ivoire, Mr. Alassane Ouattara. Let me say a few words about Côte d'Ivoire. In the 80s, many of us presented Côte d'Ivoire as a miracle, the African miracle, simply because of the aggressive development policies initiated by the former president Houphouët-Boigny, not only in infrastructure development, but also education, particularly technical education, and a very liberal and inclusive policy to the point where much of West African intellectuals, scientists, moved to Côte d'Ivoire to support this development effort. What is also very interesting about Côte d'Ivoire is the fact that the country went through a bloody civil war for about 8 years. And yet, during those years, it was the top country in West Africa in FDI. It's also, beside this tragedy, is also, the wealthiest country in West Africa today. So the way the country recovered from these tragedies is not only a testament to the policy that was implemented by President Houphouët-Boigny, but also because Côte d'Ivoire was lucky, beside the warlords, to have technocrats, to have visionary technocrats, if the word exists, like Mr. Patrick Achi. And first, he was a student in physics in Côte d'Ivoire before getting his engineering degree in electrical engineering, and studied for his master in business administration at Stanford. So after working in the private sector, in consulting, he moved to government, first as an advisor, and then later on to become the minister of infrastructure, probably the longest serving minister of infrastructure on the continent, 16 years. And he worked for three presidents, So despite, the conflict in the country, he managed to attract interest from different governments and different political parties. And later on, he went in politics himself to become MP, and after being elected, he became prime minister. And now, after a short staying at Harvard as fellow, he went back to Côte d'Ivoire to be a special advisor to the current president. So his background is really a testament to what Africa potential really represents. So hopefully, we will have many young people, many people in government, in bureaucracy, who can be inspired by his experience. So he'll be presenting for 10 minutes his experience, not only in Côte d'Ivoire, but also in Africa in general, on industrial policy. And without further ado, so Patrick, the floor is yours.
After such an introduction, I feel like speechless. Thank you very much, Leonard. First of all, I would like to thank Princeton for the opportunity to come here for a couple of days and have this talk. Thank you, Atif. We had a very interesting talk a year ago, I guess, after I read your book, House of the Dead, and saw your podcast with IMF Africa Department Head, Abebe Selassie. I gave you a call. I mean, I did everything I could to talk to you because I say, I need to talk to this guy. I've been going through so much within the bureaucracy, the administration, and I felt like, who can understand me, you know? And then when I heard you talking, I say, I need to see this guy because there's so much in my stomach that I need to free. So if I talk to him, maybe I'll, feel in peace and sleep a little bit. Yes, because
I'm so glad my wife is in the audience.
So you're very lucky, madam. My wife is, your neighbor too. So yes, 40 years back, as I graduated from Stanford, I had the choice to stay in the state. I have, a lot of proposition. And at that time, any company who would pick you up to work could just get a citizenship for you in a month, after they grab you. So I was really tempted. But I felt I owed too much to my country. And second thought was, what will be my added value in this country? There's so many other engineers, managers, being there or not being there wouldn't make any difference. But being back home in Africa, where we really lacked human resources, maybe I would be in a position where I could be a game changer, who knows? But yes, I did decide to go back home, not knowing that I would even be in a government because, I was heading up the private sector. I opened my own consulting firm. It was fine, working for the World Bank, government. And finally, I was picked up to work in the government. In 2000, I was appointed Minister of Infrastructure. And all along, I've been working, trying to make everything I could possibly do to change the narrative of the African continent and my country. And it is such an experience that, because everybody is asking himself, Africa should be rising. So much potential, so much natural resources, human capacity, this youth. How come this country is not moving? Every 10 years we say, this is the time. Now is the time Africa is going to rise. And then the next 10 years is the same story again. And here we are. After 60 years, 70 years, we're still lagging behind so far compared to many other countries that 60 years back were almost at the same stage as we are, talking about GDP per capita. I don't want to talk about China, India, Malaysia, and even lately Vietnam, who until 1975 was still in war. Look at, after just 30 and 40 years, how they leapfrog. And how come a country like mine, who's been doing quite well, and I agree with Leonard, but still hasn't been able to do as much as Vietnam? My country is 332,000 square kilometers, and Vietnam is 300,000 square kilometers. So And, I have more arable land than Vietnam, much water than Vietnam. They have the Mekong Delta and some other one. But we have 4 main rivers, rainfall like you cannot even imagine. So what is the problem? What's going on? What went wrong? What did we do wrong? What did they do right? We need to really try to dig in, because the way forward will be much challenging for the continent and for our countries. Talking about industrial policy, to make it really short, I think that, the eminent professor here, went through most of it earlier. But I guess it's very important to understand the beginning of the story so that, you can, grasp, what went on. We got right after the independence with this post-colonial, type of economy where it was mainly export-led commodity, agricultural commodity. Côte d'Ivoire was exporting cocoa, coffee, palm oil, rubber, cashew nut, all these production. And normally the objective was to improve the agricultural side, let's say the agricultural industry, like you put it rightly, by modernizing the agriculture. First of all, improving the yield by having selected seed, high yield seed, fertilizer, being able to have also mechanization, so on and so forth. But that didn't happen. Up to now, only 3% of agriculture in the African continent is irrigated, compared to 40% in Southeast Asia, more than in Asia. So what happened? What went wrong? People didn't know what, need to be done. Yes, they knew it, but it didn't happen. Then we move to the processing of this raw material, because you need added value. So you could transform cocoa into chocolate, coffee, palm oil, so on and so forth. And we've been struggling since then to really achieve that objective, because we had the need to generate revenue. We had the need to create jobs. And by no other means but developing the private sector, you can do that. For the first 20 years, as he put it, the country insisted in trying to make processing of these commodities, develop also the human capacity through education, and third, developing the infrastructure, mainly the transport infrastructure, to be able to move goods, to the port and export the good. And it went quite well, but it was an export-led commodity. The processing part didn't work. And we used massive amount of money through building infrastructure. World Bank, most of MDBs, because we didn't have access to the market at that time. But the problem is not the growth. Then you realize that at the end of the day, the problem is, can you sustain the growth? What are the fundamentals of the economy that bring you to that growth? If it's just commodity, it means that, if you have a crash on the price in the market, you don't have any more economy. And that's what happened. All of a sudden, the price was, half divided in two. We couldn't sustain the debt service anymore. Everything stopped from one day to the next. Then come the structural adjustment program. So the people come and they say, look, we have to privatize, because most of these companies are state-owned companies. They are poorly managed. And then you do not have enough capacity to mobilize the resources to move up this agenda. All has to be shifted to the private sector. That was done. But then all along, they came up with this idea of the Washington Consensus. And they said that the world is divided in two. You have the merchant sector and the non-merchant sector. Non-merchant sector is public administration. You invest in road, education, health, And then the private sector take over the development of the key strategic sector that is going to drive growth sustainably and inclusively. But the private sector who bought the processing company have no interest whatsoever to develop processing there because they have the added value back home. And there was no way to constrain them to increase production or to move up the value chain. When you take the cocoa sector, the whole value chain of the cocoa sector, my country is the first world producer of cocoa, 2.5 million tons. The whole value chain is $140 billion from the farm to the store. We are making 7% of that value chain. Now, tell me, how can you move up, grow, sustain a growth with just 7% of a value chain? If you can move all the way to 20% or 25% of the value chain, you can double your GDP in 10 years. But how do you make it? Since the state cannot create state-owned parastatals, and only the private sector can do it, and they will tell you, we have the market, and people will not be willing to buy the product if the chocolate is made in Côte d'Ivoire. And also, the knowledge for the processing all the way through is just outside. Same thing for the coffee. Same thing for the palm oil. Except that for the palm oil, in the early 70s, Malaysia was looking for a high-yield plant since, their research was not advanced enough. So we have this co-sharing research center with the French, which had the best yield plant. So they came over, took the plant, went back to Malaysia. At the time they came, we were producing 300,000 tons of palm oil. They were producing 500,000 tons of palm oil. Today, they are second after Indonesia. They are producing 20 million tons of palm oil. Guess how much Côte d'Ivoire is producing? 500,000 tons. What went wrong? What did they do that we didn't do? We didn't have the private sector that will do that. And the state was not allowed to do anything else but build roads, build infrastructure, educate people, do the help. And you can move like that, We didn't have enough resources to go into research, technology, science. We didn't have enough resources to build the talent, the engineer the Chinese were able to do, enough of them. And the few of them that were able to train, brain drain. They went to the World Bank, to IMF, they followed Leonard in Princeton. And here we were there, left just with our will. So, and it's been going like that, but yet the government has decided to push the private sector, and the only way to do it was the DFI, the financial, attract the private sector through foreign direct investment. So we started with the investment code. You have to that tax holiday everywhere, no tax the profit for 10, 15 years, tax break for all custom import on equipment, free access to land, anything almost free. That's the only condition that will come. Yet some of them came. But they just did the first processing, first transformation. They didn't go much further down the line. Yet we invest heavily in transport infrastructure, in power infrastructure, in education, to the extent where we were once again indebted. And we were just waiting for a couple of years to get the debt alleviation program through EPIC. It took us a couple of years that we couldn't do any investment, and we got out of that again. But then we started to look around and say, look, that cannot go on and on like that. You get to a debt distress, and then, you alleviate it by IMF, so on and so forth. And 10 years back, Again, you hear, and then you into this vicious circle of going from one debt distress to another debt distress, because any growth cannot be sustained since the fundamentals are not same. We were not able to develop an internal financial market. We are not able to develop a small and medium-sized enterprise. More than 80 to 90% of the economy is an informal economy. Yet the resources are there, the natural one. People are there, and now the political will is there. But it's difficult to access all the resources. So I was given a chance right before I was appointed prime minister by my head of state to work on a 10-year strategic plan. I think, thanks God, that's why I left Stanford. To be one day in the position to be on the driving seat so that really I can go over this burden of that bureaucracy, all this governance issue, the corruption issue, and then, I will let my dream come true. For once, I went to Vietnam. I went to Malaysia. I went to Singapore. I went to China because I said, look, I want to change things, and where else can I learn what to do? But to these countries who will be able to make it. And I started with Vietnam, because with Vietnam, I said, look, it's just 75. This country was completely devastated. No education, no infrastructure, no nothing. How did they make it? I went there. I said, I want to meet the people who were in charge 40 years back, not you guys, So they looked for, an old lady somewhere, 80 years old, professor at university, who was part of the team that worked out the Do Moi, when in 85, finally Vietnam decided that the collectivist, whatever communist things would not work anymore. They had 100 million people to feed. They had to be very pragmatic. They had to move to a market economy, but just adapt the world socialist market economy to please, their people. But at the end of the day, it was just privatization, market-led export. So she told me exactly, she said, we had no other way. And then, she said, what she said. But after I went to Malaysia, I went to all these places, I realized that, there was a key turning point on her history that led us to the wrong direction. This is when these people came with this Washington consensus of, the state to just sit and watch and hope that people will come and develop the country for them. Never, never, never happened anywhere else in the world. Not in the US, not in Europe, and not lately in Southeast Asia or in China. The state was in charge. The state was in control. They were the one who will lead the strategic thinking, which are the key sectors that we feel we will have a competitive advantage and that we should push. How will we use our central bank to help the people who are doing it? They were thinking out of the box. These people from the World Bank and IMF will come, they will sit in their hotel room for a couple of days, and they will leave. Some country director of the World Bank would sit there for a year. They won't even see the Minister of Finance one day. If they can see the deputy, happy. But just, with the technical people. They had this capacity to say, we know what we want. We know where we're going. We can share with you your knowledge to the extent it can help us, but let us move forward our own agenda. And very quickly, they understood that they should be independent from the World Bank and IMF money. By all means, they should be able to access the market themselves. But more than that, they should be able to create an internal financial market that will finance quite a few major investments and promote the private sector. They also went to a lot of state-owned enterprise. Luckily, they had the human resources. It was much better managed than what we went through in Africa. But, the issue is people just were left there thinking that they should cross their arm and that the development will come from someone who will come, be very interesting to come and develop the private sector. So I really want to emphasize, this issue. Now, as the world is moving, people have understood that, we need to be leading and we need to have to pick up really key strategic sectors. We have to attract the private sector by all means. And, we went through that. But as you give all these tax incentives for 10 and 15 years, at the end of the day, these people are making their business, they're making profit. They're not generating any tax for you. And yet you are doing all the massive infrastructure development. So you find yourself once again indebted and not generating sufficient revenue to sustain the debt. And you're struggling with that issue. The fiscal room is so small that no one is telling you that you're in debt distress, but yet you're in a silent debt because after you pay the salary and the debt service, you can merely finance education and health. And you're moving like that with no visibility in an environment where everybody is saying that in the next 25 years to come, we will be facing challenges that we haven't had 20 years back. Political fragmentation, climate change, demography. The population of Africa is going to double by 25 years, 2.5 billion, a quarter of the population of the world. And you're wondering, what you're going to do with that. Because now the biggest threat for a government is the youth. If these people cannot feed themselves, if they cannot be sheltered, if they cannot find a job, they are able to destabilize any government. The military are not the one we're afraid about. The kids. Each of them have a mobile phone. Any remote place in any country, they see everything. And they want to have the life that any 16 years old age kids that them have. They can see what's happening in Princeton. They look at in the street, Washington, D.C., and they don't even think they are in Africa. They just believe what they see in this machine. And as AI is coming and added up his new dream, it's getting worse and worse. They want it all. They want it now. If you cannot give it to them, it means you're not fit for purpose. You should leave office. They won't wait until 5 years, new election, because it's too late. So all that to say that most of the conflict that you see arise in the continent, it's not political issue. It's not tribal issue anymore. Whoever tells you that, he's telling a lie. It's the pressure of the youth, who represents 70% of the population. In my country, 70% of the population is age under 35. And most of them are struggling on a daily basis to survive. Migration is not an issue. How many of them could make it? So they are there at home, and we have to live with that. And that's bring the debate on access to the resources. Now, here I am, Prime Minister, every single day waking up, having to face people who need access to food, who need access to water, who need access to electricity, who need access to a job. And people are telling me that's not the most important thing. And the only thing they can give me money for is climate. Yes, I understand climate is an issue. And I'm also threatened. But it's a much longer perspective. Maybe in 10 years, maybe in 20 years. What about today? What about tomorrow? They say, yes, I understand. But, I just have money for climate. So for development, I can see, I can help. But this is no more my priority. Who's setting the priority? Now, I understand that there's no one sitting there concerned about my priority but myself. But how do I access the market? How can I make it after the Ukraine war and the interest rate being that high and always having already such a difficulty to sustain my debt, every single, term? As the world is moving and coming, it's a major concern for us. But yes, we have to struggle, I guess. And this is just what I wanted to share with you before I let my friends, have the floor. Thank you very much for your attention.